Hi, welcome back. In our previous classes, we have looked at theory of change, we have looked at conceptual framework, we have looked at, under theory of change, of course, we have touched um, on the activities, the changes that we want. We looked at conceptual framework, the general overview of how things or how factors relating to our output. Then we looked at result framework, where we go and look into the result, intermediate result, sub-intermediate result, strategic objective, and goal of the project, how they influence and interact with each other. Now we are on logic framework, or what we call log frame. Here we are going to look at the details of each activities, each input, and look at the outcome. So we are going it in a deeper way. So let's have a look. Logic framework is a tool used for designing, planning, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating a project. So it is used throughout the project life cycle, which still include monitoring and evaluation. It is an extension of results framework that provides more detail on each level of result. So as I've said, it provides more detail on each level of result by giving you the activity, the input, the activity, and so on. Also known as log frame, M&D framework, and also program impact pathway. So these are the names that you can get for logic framework. Component of logical or logic framework, we have 5 essential component inputs. These are the resources invested into the program. For example, technical assistant personnel, training curriculum, computers, condoms are a few examples of the resources, the input. Then we have a process, or we have activities carried out to achieve program's objective. For example, training event. The training event itself is a process or an activity. We have a vaccination. When we conduct COVID-19 vaccination, we are going to have it as an activity or the process. A test. If, for example, we are dealing with HIV test, then having it is an activity or a process which leads to achieving program's objective. We have the outputs, the intermediate result achieved at the program level through the execution of the activity. It is the opposite of the causes of the problem, which we have already mentioned in our previous frameworks. That is result or sub-intermediate results. Outcomes. The set of short-term to intermediate result that population level achieved by program through execution of activities. And we have said outcomes are opposites of the effect of the problem to the population. Impact is the long-term effects, is the end result of our program. For example, changes in health status, the condition that the program is intended to ultimately influence, like mortality, morbidity, fertility, are the program outcome, as measured by appropriate indicators. Of course, all this impact, outcome, and output have to be measured by appropriate indicators. And then we are saying impact is the opposite of problem statement, or it is the goal of our project. Great. Let's look at the overview of the logic framework. The visual representation of the K here should be logic framework. All right. We are doing this together. All right. There are two structure of logic framework from different perspective and different groups of people who designs. So structure one looks like we have the input, we have the process or activity, just as they are arranged in our introduction in the component of the logic framework. Then we have the outcome, and then we have the impact. Another structure of logic framework can be, we can have goals, outcome, input, activity, of course, output, activity, and input. The order you can notice. And also in this second logic framework, you have to give the summary, you have to give the indicators, you have to give the mean of verification of the indicators, that is the data sources, and then you have to come up with the assumptions and the risks. I think I would prefer the second structure of logic framework due to the details it gives and brings to my project. So while looking for or developing a plan or a proposal, you can choose either of these, but I would suggest the second structure gives more details. All right, let's look at an example of logic framework, which is to provide improved health status. The input that we are going to have is develop clinical training curriculum. Now, what we are inputting here is clinical training curriculum has to be developed as our input. Of course, there should be the personnel as our input. But when we are dealing with this logic frame, you can see that we are dealing with one specific activity up to the output, the outcome, and the impact that it brings to the project. So from here, you can look at the input is develop clinical training curriculum. The process of getting it in our project is by conducting training events. Then, of course, you have to develop the indicators for this. Output, the short-term result of conducting training would be practitioner trained in new clinical techniques. So health practitioners will be given a new training on a new clinical techniques. Then outcome, what is intermediate result are we going to get from here is increased in clients served by newly trained providers. Now you can see the outcome, a long-term or intermediate outcome is like increased client serviced by new technicians. And then the long-term, the global goal of our project is declining morbidity levels in the target population because they are being treated by new clinicians or newly trained clinicians. That is how logic framework looks and works. You can have it in, let's explain this example. Straightforward view of project design to reduce population morbidity by increasing the number of clients served by trained healthcare providers. As you can see, it does not account for all factors that may be influencing operation and result of conceptual framework would, but instead focuses specifically on project activities and impact. So it deals with a specific activity and the impact that activity would bring. This narrow focus help the program managers and monitoring and evaluation planners as they clarify direct relationships between the elements of particular interest within particular program effort. So you can see it has given you the focus of a particular training, a particular event, a particular output, impact to the project. All right. Another example, the wider one, which you can have is a VCT program where you have an input like human resource, the personnel, and providing the the testing. VCT protocols, you have to have the protocols in place. Human resources, we have financial resources, we have HIV test kits. So these are our inputs, the physical inputs, actually, something like that, if I would say. But they don't have to be very physical anyway. Then after having this input, we are going to have the process. The process would include provide pre-test counseling, provide the test itself, and then provide post-test counseling. So you can see that our input are financial resources, VCT protocols, human resources, and HIV test kits. Then what all this does is provide HIV testing. Then, of course, we have provide pre-test counseling and we have post-test counseling. After you have this post-test counseling, you're going to have an output, a short-term result, like people learn their HIV status. Now, what will happen if on the short term, the people learn about their HIV status? The next thing would be the outcome. What outcome? What long-term result or intermediate-term result would you expect? Clients develop personalized HIV risk reduction strategies. So once they have known that they have their status, now they start improving HIV risk reduction strategies that can be going for checking on the level of the cells if they are positive and they start being put on ARVs, or again avoiding risky behavior or decreasing risky behavior that would lead to the condition or the disease. What is the impact of this project? After having all these inputs now in a general, the impact would be HIV transmission rate would decrease, HIV incidence would decrease, HIV morbidity and mortality will decrease because of all these input, processes, output, outcome, impact. But again, this is without forgetting the assumptions. This is in a place where you also start thinking of the indicators and also how to collect the data sources on these indicators. So that is why I say you can have both of these structures, but having it in this logic framework like this one would be my preference. You can have the water pipe project input like human resource. Indicators are skills and number of manpowers, check the size of the work, and so on. So you can have a look at this logic framework. In summary, simply put, input, that is resources, are used in the processes, which is activities that can produce immediate result, that is outputs, and ultimately leading to long-term or broader result. Those are outcomes and impacts. It is important for the project design team to use logic framework to organize ideas and causal linkages between activities, intermediate result, long-term result, and high-level goal or impact. Log frames are common on United Kingdom Department for International Development, that is DFID funded programs. We have said USAID mostly use result framework, and DFID mostly use logic framework or log frame. The logic framework is the tool for the team to develop consensus around and communicate the project strategy. I think it is a good practice to have this logic framework as you plan, design, implement, monitor, and evaluate your project. So, having said that, we have gone through a lot of designs and the framework. Now it is your time now to go and have a revision on them. In our next class, we are going to look at analysis of assumptions and risks in our project. I hope this class is helpful. Thank you and enjoy learning.